Okay.
Hello everyone, today I'm having chat with one of the greatest creative leaders in our industry, and we wanted to share this conversation with you all. Hi Matt, thanks for your time today.
Hi Azin, how you going? I've got Tank with me today as well. I hope that's okay for now anyway.
Hi Tank. So let's start with who are you and what you're doing.
Okay, so I've been practicing landscape architecture since I commenced work experience back in 1997. Prior to that, I was also working in landscape construction. My uncle had a residential landscape construction business that I worked with and worked for him for a number of years before studying. What else am I doing? Well, I live on the west coast of Victoria, about an hour outside of Melbourne, just one street back from the Southern Ocean, which is pretty awesome, and in a little village called Janjuk. I'm currently working on a range of projects, from strategic advisory work with government, certainly looking at the role of open space and green infrastructure, but also working on right down to the scale of an inclusive pop-up playground at the moment as well. So quite a broad range of projects. It's what else is happening. I think, well, obviously we've all been working at home now for a number of weeks with COVID-19. So we're in week 3, which has been, quite trying on some fronts. And I think it's presented some real opportunities as well, particularly from a design perspective. And in that time, and I think last week we had our supermoon on the 8th of April. So the surf has been pretty amazing as well. So I've been fortunate to also be able to surf quite a bit at this time of the year, which is typically really good surf as well. So yeah, that's what I've been up to.
That's great. Speaking of places, what places, people, and projects had greatest impact on your professional career?
I think in terms of influence, probably firstly where I grew up. I grew up in Williamstown, which is a small peninsula about 6 kilometres out of the Melbourne CBD. It's a fascinating little town, and when I grew up was certainly a village. Can you hear those dogs in the background?
No.
Those dogs have started singing. I hope that's okay. Tank might join them. But yeah, that was a fantastic place to grow up. It was an active port. It was certainly a village and had water on 3 sides. So I've been drawn to water from a young age, but probably more than just water itself, more the ocean and the bays, seasonality. And I think that had a huge influence on me at a young age. Certainly not just the change of seasons, but also the influence things like the ocean and those really strong energies have on people and place. I think moving through the Southern Ocean has and will always have probably the greatest influence on me in terms of my love and awe of the ocean, but also just that energy of natural systems and the open space. I absolutely love it. I think it has a huge, profound impact, a positive impact on people, and certainly people that get to live there and experience that on a daily basis. So that's certainly shaped my interest in how natural systems and landscapes can influence people, and clearly led to my love and passion of landscape architecture. I think family, obviously, as well. My family have always been avid gardeners and into fruit production, and I think, a really strong memory of mine is my grandpa's apricot trees and apple trees. And I can, just saying that loud now, I can smell that really strong sensory connection. I also had a blood plum tree next to my bedroom window, and I've replanted those in our new house now. So I've always had that from a family perspective. I think in terms of other influences from people, there are several that come to mind. My sculpture teacher in year 12 and year 11 in VCE, Seth Seidemann, he was amazing. He taught me a lot about proportion and scale. I still would say I got that from him in terms of the first, at that age, starting to interrogate and test what scale and proportion in design was, using sculpture as that medium. And so that was really important, and it's certainly influenced me from a landscape architectural perspective now. In terms of landscape architects, it's really clear that the most influential person there to date has been Sue Ann Ware, or Dr. Sue Ann Ware, I should say. She was my final project leader, and just a phenomenal person, and just a very timely person for me. I think I needed someone of her caliber and her empathy at that time in life, but also at uni. And I'd comfortably say that she was really influential on me, and just her belief in me was, really important. So I think another thing to state, I was just thinking about this then, was RMIT, when I went through the Bachelor of Design, was actually a Bachelor of Applied Science or Design. You could choose. I was that year that you could choose what you wanted to be titled. It was an exceptional course. It was, it combined science and design really well. It was the full 4 years of landscape architecture. I think privilege is right. It felt like it was a privilege to be a part of that course at the time. Like it was something else. It was really special, and I always remember that. And I've since lectured through other degrees, and always hoped that students got that same feeling that I certainly had at that time. So that's definitely been a big influence on me as well. Yeah.
Okay. Then why specifically landscape architecture?
I'm going to go back to Lego, I think, is in on this one. I'm going to start from Lego. And Mum always brings this up too. But from a young age, I was always designing cities and landscapes and scenarios, not buildings. And that's really interesting too. I never really built buildings, but I was always, Mum would say, I used to build scenarios. So I'd build a street or a park or something like that. And then I would have people in certain allocations and almost providing a script, I think. So I think I started my interest in understanding people and space at a young age there. I think what really attracts me to landscape architecture still is the scale and diversity. That's really attractive. We get to work on different scales and different programs every single day. We get to interrogate that scale right down to the bolt, but we also get to start, looking at a global trend or global patterns. So that really fascinates me. I think, landscape architecture gets to consider and interrogate, different components of people and place. So, and then we get to create something as well. So I think that's really interesting, that we get to think and we get to partake in other consultants and other areas of expertise, but ultimately we have to convert that into something. And I think that's really fascinating as well, that we don't just stop at the thought leadership or the thought process, that we then have to transition that into something physical. To that point though, and quite often it's also about what we don't create. And I think that's probably the other fascinating thing about landscape architecture, is it's as equally as of what you do as what you don't. And there's a stewardship that comes with that, I think, around protecting natural assets, enhancing certain parts and protecting others. So that fascinates me too, those different suites or different roles that we play, particularly in the natural systems. So, but yeah, they'd be the captures. It's been from a very young age, this interest. So yeah.
Yeah. So as you know, Matt, I always wanted to interview you about your amazing brain, concept design, placemaking, your leadership skills, presentation skills, and also your winning projects such as Vivid Sydney. But as you know, our industry is under pressure of this COVID-19 crisis. So I wanted to just kind of talk about this specific topic today. And as you know, architecture is our way out of this crisis, or any crisis. And as you said, we need to protect nature and our planet. with landscape architecture. So I would like to start our conversation by highlighting this and also ask you what's your opinion on few key concerns we all might have, such as how do you think COVID-19 crisis will impact our industry?
Yeah, sure, Zin. Look, I think firstly, what COVID-19 has done has exposed the notion of workplace and the ability to work remotely, yet still collaborate really well through that design process. And I was thinking about this towards the end of last week. You and I are obviously working on a number of projects together, and I thought, for the last couple of weeks since we've all been working remotely, I've witnessed some of the most interactive and I think even more importantly, equitable design processes and design sessions that I've ever seen. So it's become quite apparent to me that the notion of workplace through what we've had to do with COVID-19 needs review. And I think both from a neurodiversity perspective as well, but a lot of people have thrived in this, and it's something we probably haven't heard much on yet. I mean, we're still certainly only weeks within this new way, but I've seen real opportunity in the design process and how groups of people are feeling empowered to be involved and speak up and have I think an equitable place on the table, which, quite often in a design process in a more traditional model, there are other layers that can get in the way of that. So I think that's been really, really positive. So that's been good. I think, for the short term, the challenge is going to be for us how we work internationally, and there's no doubt about that. I think at this time, though, we'll get to focus on and experience local and national conditions much more than perhaps we had, and hopefully develop a greater understanding of how our landscape systems and processes within Australia are working, and where we can provide opportunity locally, and ultimately to have time to really assist local and national governments reconsider the notion of place, because the notion of place and how people are going to interact post-COVID is forever going to change. So I think we're going to have a huge role to play in assisting there and driving that. And I think everyone's also been thinking about the future of retail. It's certainly topical at the moment, and is going to have a huge influence on city planning and civic design. So with that comes huge opportunity. I think landscape architecture, along with the suite of expertise and specialists involved in the built environment, are going to play a significant role in interrogating and reconsidering retail and the implications of that on city planning and civic design. So I think that's going to be fascinating, actually, how that works. I think this is probably, I am a blind optimist with this, but I will say I'm a little bit worried about how design firms are going to respond. And naturally, what I saw happen during the GFC some years ago now was a lot of underpricing. The problem with that was that it probably took between 7 and 8 years for the market to correct itself after that. And I just really hope we don't go down that rabbit hole again, because it just dilutes innovation and it just takes such a long time to correct again. So I'm really quite mindful that and hopeful that doesn't happen, I suppose, because it is quite limiting. I think one thing, and this probably goes back to my points I raised earlier about growing up in Williamstown and now living in Jan Juc, that I think we've all realised that value of community and the village again. I think we've actually had to do that. But at the same time, our closest cities, being Melbourne and Sydney, are all programmed to double over the next 30 years. So, how does landscape architecture manage and organise those two opposing forces? You can have the scale of the village and then the scale of growth of, cities of 10 million. So how does that work? And that really fascinates me, how we're going to play a role there as well. I was thinking about this too, and again, very opportunistic, but landscape architecture in Australia is a relatively new profession, and I say that as in by decades. The upshot of that is that we actually have the opportunity to reinvent. We don't carry legacy or perception of all that we can bring. And so I think the upshot of this time for landscape architecture is that it can lead and realign itself to provide a pivotal role post-COVID. So again, I'd really hope that that's what we see from our profession. Yeah.
That was all great perspective. In that case, who do you think we are, and what's our role in this uncertain time with all the opportunities and challenges?
Yeah. Oh, look, I think landscape architecture and landscape architects are great facilitators, and they have the capacity to order and interrogate and prioritize a heap of information, a myriad of information, of beliefs, of requirements that define cities and also natural systems. So, I think landscape architecture has to continue ensuring that it's at the forefront of decision making. And it's been getting so much better at that. Like, from what I've witnessed, even in the last 5 years alone, it's been such a huge change from the previous 5 years. So that's really, really promising. But I think one of the things that landscape architecture is going to have to do is understand its value and also align itself with economic development. It actually needs to realise and understand the value and the broader role it plays within economic development and the economy. And by that, in many ways, it also has to mature quite quickly in order to do that. So I think that's going to be really important. I think landscape architects will need to really listen and I suppose sniff the wind, have a good understanding of what is happening. Our role is to deliver quite often just within the prescribed parameters of a project. But really, we've got to bring so much more collective knowledge than just the containerized view of a project and a time and cost associated with that. We also have to bring great optimism for the planet. I think that's why many people are landscape architects. They want to play a role of stewardship and be a part of something that can inform that change to happen. I think there's, I don't know the word, like, it's landscape architects have got to bring a grit to a project that we partake in and are a part of so many different layers of information and specialists when we go and undertake a project. Yet quite often the nature of those projects, I suppose, gets lost a little bit as well, and that information. Sometimes I think that's because we still task ourselves with making something beautiful, which I think is also incredibly important. But we're going to have to do more than that, and I think we obviously know that already. So I think there's going to be some means, even about the way we do representation and the way that our design process is actually shown is going to change. I think that's going to be important for us as well, to be heard, but also to ensure that that we're conveying and educating as well. I think we've got a real role there as well to do that. So yeah.
Yeah. So
very the question.
Very interesting. Let's talk more about that sniffing the wind, which is something new I learned, and innovation. Landscape architects are almost all creative. How do you think we can use our creativity to find new spaces for us to play in and new problems to solve for our client or prospective clients, to save our project jobs and sub-consultants' job as well?
Yeah, creative. I mean, it's interesting because, I don't believe that all landscape architects are creative. And you know what? I'm really grateful for that too. I mean, if we were all, I think that's, can you imagine what it'd be like? And that's a good thing. So, for me, the idea of creativity as a process, not a product, is quite important to just sort of discuss around the notion of creativity. And what that also does then is shows, you know, from a working project, the myriad of roles, different roles that different landscape architects play on a project. And it's critical for that to happen from vision and story to concept development, documentation, and then obviously through tender and contract admin. So that takes a suite and a process of creativity, which I think is important to note. I think the idea of creativity as a process is important to note, because we need to ensure also that landscape architecture is at the forefront of a project even before it commences. It's really important that LAs are involved in the feasibility, in understanding the realities of cost, understanding the market fluctuations of cost over time, and informing that part of a project. And that interface and influence across client at the commencement is critical. So, I think that role of creativity as a series or a process across a project is really important. It's important so that the process of the story and vision is retained, and it translates really well through the documentation and then ultimately through the tender and contract phase. So yeah, I think that's really important.
Yeah, that's very true. And yeah, that's a great summary of what we should do. What are your aims and wishes for the future of our profession, Matt?
Oh, look, I think I've always hoped and can see us continuing to play a really strong leading role in the multidisciplinary environment of city design, but also of green infrastructure, of natural systems, of the range of elements that we're involved in. I think it's important that we also have that role of protecting and engagement, not just a reaction to something. So it's, I suppose what I mean by that, quite often our projects respond to an issue or a problem. I'd like to think that we're also being brought onto projects to retain, particularly around natural systems as well. So I think that's going to become increasingly important. I mentioned earlier the idea around economic development, and I think my aim and hope for the future is that we do play a broader role in that space, and but also that our consultants and projects understand the value we bring with regard to economic development. So I still think there's a way to go there. Landscape architecture does remain somewhat disconnected in times from the economic value that we bring. And I think there's going to be a fair bit of work around there. I mentioned my complete influence and admiration for my time at RMIT University during my bachelor degree. And I'd just really love to see that energy come back into the university model. It may well be there, and if so, fantastic. But that was a very special time, and I just hope the new model, the 3+2 model, is bringing that same commitment and energy to that I was fortunate enough to experience. Probably the big one, and it's quite topical in the office at the moment, but there is this, yearning to quantify everything, and this starts to lend itself again back to economic development. But really, a big part of landscape architecture is to protect that, the intangible, those things that we cannot measure or capture, those energies I spoke about with regard to the Southern Ocean. This is fascinating, I think, and we cannot capture and design everything. So that great energy of natural systems needs stewardship, and perhaps that's enough. Trying to put it on a spreadsheet or quantify it. There's a lot of work around that, and that in itself really fascinates me, particularly under the guise of population growth that we're going to experience in our cities. So how does that all work?
So that was all amazing to hear from you. And last but not least, have you ever had any life-changing experience?
Yeah, I think having kids, I think that's absolutely, having children has been life changing in an amazingly positive way, obviously, and completely influenced my approach to design. Um, my having two boys has also been really influential on how I approach design, and the lens that I look at that through, and obviously how I then tap into childhood memory as a key part of my design too. So yeah, that's been really, really powerful. And it obviously changes as their years do as well. So that's been something else that's really fascinating. Um, Life changing as well. I think Ollie, my youngest, when Ollie was diagnosed with autism, I think when that happened, I was probably at that similar crossroads after third year uni. I was like, okay, we need to make a really big decision here on how we're going to approach and ultimately work with this new suite of challenges and opportunities. Um, so I think, thankfully I chose optimism and opportunity as keywords there. Um, because I think with Ollie now, I've been shown a whole new lens of interpreting the world. And it's a really exciting time for neurodiversity, and designing through the lens of autism and sensory processing was completely instrumental in how I approached the design for the Vivid Festival. And will continue to be influenced and really focus on the notion of inclusive design through the lens of neurodiversity. I think it's a fascinating space, and I carry bias obviously there with Old Bowl, but a real opportunity with that as well. Like I'm just so thankful to have been given that opportunity, because I probably would never have seen it to the same degree to which I have. So that's going to be a fascinating space for me as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a great attitude. And what did you tell yourself on that dark moments to be able to come back on your feet, fly, and be mature with all the success you achieved and your future successes?
Uh, Very kind, as in. I think, look, my first 2 years of university were really difficult. I completely failed first year. I just was not ready mentally for what that brought, and I was completely lost. And I actually tell students this when I've undertaken design studios and lectures. But I recall in third year promising myself to work really hard and believe in and draw off the energy of two leaders that really backed me at that time. And I mentioned Sue Ann before. I was also really fortunate to have Jane Shepherd as a studio leader. You know, those two women were just completely instrumental on me turning myself around and having that belief and optimism and I think solidifying that this is what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. So that's, I was really fortunate there, that I got to take that opportunity and move forward. Look, another one, I think, another setback. We were, uh, Em and I were traveling through Europe. We'd both just finished uni in 2000, and we were in 2002 traveling through Italy when I'd found out my father had passed away in Melbourne. So, I recall standing in a phone booth, and, this is pre-Facebook and pre-instant everything. Um, Being in a phone booth in Capri, ringing mum to let her know how beautiful the Mediterranean looked from here, and of course, being told the news that Dad had passed. So, and I just remember at that time thinking, you know what, like I've just got to promise myself that I've just got to make sure that I don't go out without achieving my goals. So that was a real pivotal moment as well. Yeah, it's quite interesting how we approach trauma and those sorts of events. But that was again, perhaps the optimism within. And I think by nature, like landscape architects are optimists. I mean, we have to be. There's the responsibility is so vast. So perhaps that was, part of my character, somewhat anyway. But yeah, those two elements were fundamental for me.
Yeah, great attitude again, and yeah, great character as you have. Thank you so much for sharing your story. I'm pretty sure everyone's going to enjoy and benefit from this conversation as much as I always do. And have a great day, everyone. So thanks, Matt.
Yeah. Thanks, Azin, and thanks as always for being so organised and getting everyone together, including myself. Yeah, much appreciated. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.